Our fantasy fairy tale begins with a desperate pursuit through the forest. In an era when immortal beings roamed the earth and humans coveted the power in their blood, vampire Seon Woo Hyul escapes from his human pursuers alongside his lover, Yoon-hae's son. Drastically outnumbered by his pursuers and their silver-tipped arrows, Woo resorts to his vampiric abilities, defeating his pursuers in mere seconds. But just as Hae's son sinks into his relieved embrace, one particularly tenacious soldier draws his bow. Woo doesn't notice the arrow aimed at his back, but Hae's son does, and she takes the shot in his stead. Consumed by grief, Woo holds his dying lover tightly in his arms. Hae's son promises that they'll find each other again in their next lives and rekindle their love, then urges Woo to drink her blood. Before we delve further into our hero's story, let us first acquaint ourselves with the ancient lore of the vampire universe. First of all, these vampires consume blood only sparingly. Though they're averse to sunlight, they're able to go outdoors during the daytime. The only drawback is that it increases their thirst for blood. The worst part about being a vampire is that they can't see themselves in mirrors. With all the attention Woo draws while walking down the street, it's clear he's well aware of his good looks. In order to fulfill his promise to Hae's son, Woo is determined to become human and experience a love that will make his heart beat. He's attempted everything, from filling his mouth with garlic to bowing through the centuries at a temple. Unfortunately, nothing works until he meets Go Yang Nam, a cat who can transform into a man. Woo's eagerness to learn his secrets and a flash of magical insight gives Yang Nam the answer: Woo must sleep in a hawthorn wood coffin for a century. Determined to achieve his goal, Woo bids farewell to his loyal but mortal butler Ju, entrusting the house to him and his descendants. With that, Woo's buddies seal him in the coffin, and we fast forward to the present day. Our human heroine, Ju In-hae, is in a bit of a predicament. Her fraudster landlord has just fled with her housing deposit, and a rescue from homelessness has come in the most unexpected manner. After being missing for 5 years, her father has been declared legally dead, which means In-hae can now receive his inheritance, and that includes his mansion, which gives a relieved In-hae a roof over her head. Venturing into its depths, phone flashlight in hand, she stumbled upon a coffin and lifts the lid only to be shocked when Woo crawls out. She's baffled by his explanation about being the true owner of the house, and she's just moments away from calling the cops. Woo realizes he's tempted by the scent of a wound on In-hae's arm, and a glance in the mirror returns a translucent reflection. To the dismay of our sleeping beauty, he's fallen one day short of his 100-year mission. Woo approaches In-hae with a menacing demeanor, warning her that she will face consequences for breaking their agreement. Doesn't she know how toxic hawthorn wood is to vampires? Or consider the muscle aches he endured because of it? Woo bares his fangs, just moments away from sinking them into her neck, but In-hae strikes first, biting him instead. Stunned by the bite, Woo collapses in a dead faint, startling In-hae so much that she rushes him to the hospital. Once there, the doctors pronounce him dead due to his lack of a heartbeat until the scent of another patient's blood brings him back to life. It's campy and it's absolutely hilarious. In-hae has had enough of Woo's nonsense, and she hops in a taxi to head home. Lost in the newly unfamiliar modern world, Woo wanders the streets again and again until he finally navigates his way back to the mansion. To his dismay, he can't prove his tall tales to In-hae. He's lost all his powers, leaving him hissing at his missing fangs and doing frustrated bunny hops in an effort to fly. The next morning, In-hae is awoken with bad news that sends her running back to her old home. Since her landlord has sold the building and eloped, the building is about to be torn down, and the demolition crew rudely throws out her belongings. Thankfully, the real estate CEO Shin Do-shik swiftly puts a stop to their hostile behavior, and the two immediately recognize each other. They had their meet cute when they bumped into each other on their college campus, and she helped tend the scrape on his hand. It had been love at first sight for Do-shik, and he's glad to see In-hae again. The independent In-hae is reluctant to accept any help, so Do-shik leaves her with his contact card and a promise that he's only one phone call away. On her way home, In-hae spots the fraudster landlord, and she immediately gives chase, determined to get her money back. As she runs after him, she is nearly hit by a car, and her bite mark on Woo's neck throbs painfully. Thanks to a vial of blood that Yang Nam gave him, Woo regains just enough vampiric power to track down In-hae and save her from the aggressive landlord. Bending a steel pipe with his bare hands, Woo makes quick work of the fraudster. When a knife cut on Woo's cheek heals itself in mere seconds, In-hae can no longer deny that he's a supernatural being. Extending his hand to her, Woo asks In-hae if she finally believes him. Woo's heroic rescue ends with In-hae chasing the crook all the way to the police station. She accidentally drops her wallet in the process, which Woo picks up. As he begins the long trek home, a department store catches Woo's curiosity. By the end of the day, Woo comes home carrying a dozen shopping bags and In-hae's maxed out credit card. When In-hae finds out, she's downright furious. Does he even realize how hard she's been saving for years? But Woo reassures her not to fret. A century ago, he had buried gold beneath the floorboards, and all he needs to do is dig it up only to find it's vanished without a trace. So much for Woo's fortune. They find themselves arguing once again about who owns the mansion. In-hae holds the title deed, but Woo pushes back, firmly stating, "It's my house." In-hae disagrees. In an attempt to fix Woo's mess, In-hae opts to resell his purchases online. After an interesting adventure through the subway, Woo finally meets the buyer, who turns out to be his friend Sang-hae. With Sang-hae's help, Woo gets a fake ID, though it's tough for them to keep their jobs at the funeral home, especially after Woo decides to nap in someone else's coffin. Meanwhile, after hearing that the scammer was caught, Do-shik drops by In-hae's old apartment, finding her in the middle of packing up her things. Right then, a cockroach darts across the floor, causing In-hae to scream and hide behind Do-shik. Much to his amusement, Do-shik offers to give In-hae and her boxes a ride home, which is how he meets Woo for the first time. He's surprised by how cold Woo's hand feels, but before he can react, In-hae quickly pulls their hands apart, brushing it off as poor circulation. Though skeptical, Do-shik decides to let it slide. With Woo still struggling with unemployment, In-hae decides he can contribute by helping with spring cleaning. As they dust furniture and clean windows together, they share several endearing moments that leave them both a bit flustered. By nightfall, the house is spotless. Curious about the mansion's past, In-hae asks Woo how long he's lived there. Woo reveals that he's been waiting for someone staying in the same place for 400 years, hoping she might return one day. Already, we see the similarities between Hae-sun and In-hae. Neither is afraid of Woo, and when asked why, they both give the same response: because he saved them. Although Woo isn't human, to them, he's the furthest thing from a monster. As fate and the magical connection between our favorite couple would have it, Woo gets the chance to play the knight in shining armor again. His brooding on the rooftop is cut short by a sharp pain from his bite mark, and he rushes inside, just in time to see a chandelier about to crash down on a sleeping In-hae. Instinctively, he sweeps her up in his arms, saving her from harm. In that moment, Woo notices a drop of blood on In-hae's chapped lips. The thirsty vampire within him can no longer resist the temptation and leans in for a taste, which leads to him accidentally kissing her. Of course, In-hae responds by giving Woo a well-deserved smack. In-hae is left dazed from her first kiss, but Woo is shaken for an entirely different reason. When he tasted her blood, he had a vision of Hae-sun's final moments, as though her memories were hidden in the blood itself. Woo refuses to believe what this might mean. There's no way the fiery In-hae could be a reincarnation of the gentle Hae-sun. Woo might be deeply stuck in denial, but his curiosity gets the best of him. He can't stop thinking about his connection with In-hae, and through a series of lucky coincidences, he ends up getting a job as a janitor at In-hae's high school. He's thrilled to be near her, while she's far less excited about it. Meanwhile, Do-shik is harboring a secret of his own. There's a curse in his bloodline. None of the men in his family have made it past the age of 40. Although medical tests show that Do-shik's heart is perfectly healthy, he's been experiencing abnormal symptoms, and he can't help but fear that one day he'll succumb to a heart attack too. Determined to avoid his destiny, Do-shik retrieves an ancient ledger from his personal safe. It's a family heirloom passed down through generations, and as the camera pans over the secret book, we see its title vampire record. Yang Nam steps in to help Woo, explaining his situation. He compares Woo to a pot of boiling water that was removed from the stove at 99 DC, and that he needs In-hae's blood to reach full mortality. There's just one catch: In-hae's blood is too cold, so Woo must warm it up by making her fall deeply and passionately in love. Woo starts to reflect about the entire situation. When In-hae steps up to defend him against false accusations at school, clearing his name, he starts to see her differently. Everything starts to fall into place: their unique bond, her ability to open his coffin, her unwavering support. Putting the pieces together, Woo approaches In-hae and accidentally calls her by Hae-sun's name. When Woo calls In-hae by Hae-sun's name, In-hae is thoroughly weirded out. She panics and pulls out her pepper spray, leaving Woo in tears from the capsaicin. After recovering, he tells In-hae about his past and how he felt Hae-sun's presence in her blood. Though In-hae finds the idea of reincarnation in past lives hard to believe, but Woo is determined to make In-hae fall in love with him. He begins his courtship by secretly leaving flower bouquets on her doorstep. Unfortunately for Woo, In-hae sees the gesture as more creepy than charming, and she almost reports it to the police. His next idea is to watch a romantic movie together, but it turns into nap time for In-hae. Meanwhile, Do-shik heads to the airport to greet the successful chairwoman In-hae-won, who has just returned to Korea. He greets her with a beaming smile, and we see her face. She looks exactly like Hae-sun. Trouble arises when the overbearing principal informs In-hae that the school won't be renewing their contract with her. Feeling down and in a daze, In-hae finds herself at Do-shik's wine bar, where she tries to drink away her sorrows. By coincidence, Do-shik happens to drive by and sees In-hae walking into his bar. He immediately goes in behind her and notices that In-hae is overfilling her wine glass. Wanting to lift her spirits, he quickly writes up some coupons and creates an impromptu sure-win lucky draw. When In-hae learns from the staff that her meal is complimentary, she smiles, feeling pleased with her good fortune. Sensing that In-hae needs space, Do-shik doesn't approach her. Instead, he quietly follows her home from a distance to make sure she's safe, only stepping in when she stumbles. She tries to downplay her job loss, but Do-shik keenly observes that she's always quick to say she's fine, even when she's not. Back at the mansion, In-hae cracks open a beer for round 2 and ends up pouring her heart out to Woo. Losing her job, her source of stability since her father disappeared and her mother passed away, is hitting her harder than she expected. Understanding that In-hae is lonelier than she appears, Woo gently strokes her hair, assuring her that she's done well taking care of herself. The touch brings In-hae back to her senses, leaving her flustered, and she quickly excuses herself to bed. At work, Woo overhears the principal boasting about how he got rid of In-hae to make room for his friend, so Woo dumps a bucket of water on him while he's in the bathroom. The story leaves In-hae in fits of laughter, but it also means they're both out of a job now. After several unsuccessful interviews, In-hae is feeling frustrated. Do-shik suggests they turn her mansion into a guest house. Woo is initially skeptical, but In-hae points out that making the mansion a popular spot might increase the chances of Hae's son showing up. With that, Woo is convinced, and In-hae agrees to Do-shik's business proposal. Do-shik's deep generosity toward In-hae makes Woo suspect that Do-shik has feelings for her. This means all Woo needs to do is support their relationship and act as a wingman for them. When Do-shik visits the mansion for a tour, Woo takes the chance to ask him about his feelings for In-hae. Do-shik admits that Woo living with In-hae bothers him, and he shares that In-hae is a woman he feels a strong desire to protect. This answer leaves Woo satisfied yet bothered. Meanwhile, Hae-won becomes increasingly drawn to the mansion, claiming that something about it keeps attracting her. Since In-hae isn't willing to sell the property, Hae-won proposes investing in the guest house instead. This brings Hae-won to the mansion just as In-hae and Woo return from a neighborhood night patrol. The moment Woo sees her, he immediately recognizes Hae-won as Hae's son, freezing in shock. Then, overcome by centuries of longing, he rushes forward and pulls her into a tight embrace. Hae-won's playful, flirtatious reaction to Woo's sudden embrace only highlights that she's not the Hae's son he once knew. Afterward, Woo becomes unusually quiet, struggling to sort through his emotions. He feels as though he's failed Hae's son by not becoming human and finds it unbearable to see her look alike without her memories. Noticing this unfamiliar, dejected side of Woo, In-hae tries to comfort him with a blood jelly dessert. She tells him that his unwavering loyalty to Hae's son and waiting centuries for her is also a form of love, beyond just physical signs like a heartbeat. Her words resonate with Woo, offering him a perspective he hadn't considered before. Woo focuses on his goal of warming In-hae's blood and becoming human, so he decides to make progress on that front. Acting as a matchmaker, he encourages Do-shik to take more initiative since In-hae isn't one to ask for help. Do-shik takes her furniture shopping for the guest house, where they're mistaken for newlyweds and reminisce about their college days over lunch. Later, In-hae invites Do-shik and Hae-won to see the house, and Woo presents Hae-won with a bouquet to apologize for their awkward first encounter. The four of them have dinner together, and when Hae-won notices Woo not eating, she offers him a prawn. Remembering what happened the last time Woo ate human food, In-hae tries to intervene, but she's unable to stop him due to the social pressure. Woo bites into the prawn, his eyes widening in amazement as he savors the taste. Enjoying it so much, he snatches a second prawn right from Do-shik's hand and ends up devouring the entire platter. In-hae sighs in frustration, while Do-shik and Hae-won look on, amused. Before long, Woo is completely drunk and stumbles over to Hae-won, calling her Hae's son again while gazing deeply into her eyes. In-hae quickly intervenes, dragging him outside to prevent a scene. Unable to sober him up, she has to slap him, which finally snaps him out of it. Realizing what he's done, Woo leans on In-hae's shoulder, seeking a moment of comfort. When they return inside, a light bulb suddenly shorts out above Hae-won, startling her. Woo rushes to her with supernatural speed, catching her before she falls. In-hae, thinking fast, turns Do-shik around so he doesn't see Woo's vampiric abilities. Once Hae-won is safe, Woo's vision blurs, and he collapses, unconscious. In-hae quickly ushers their guests out, assuring them that Woo just needs to sleep it off. While Hae-won feels flustered from the heroic save, Do-shik becomes suspicious that something is off. As the mansion undergoes renovations, Do-shik offers In-hae a temporary apartment to stay in for the week, while Woo opts to crash with his vampire friends to avoid being a third wheel. After In-hae settles in, Do-shik takes her out to dinner, where he confesses that he had a college crush on her. It's the reason he kept visiting the mediocre restaurant where she worked. Do-shik recalls how In-hae often dismissed his attempts to start a conversation during their college days, and how he was too intimidated to confess his feelings at the time. However, he's glad they've reconnected now. During their walk back, In-hae gently turns him down, explaining that she wants to focus on the guest house for the time being. Do-shik doesn't ask why. Instead, he handles it gracefully, reassuring her that he'll continue to help. Though it's not an outright rejection, it's clear that In-hae isn't prioritizing romance or Do-shik at the moment. That night, though In-hae and Woo stay in their respective accommodations, they're so accustomed to each other's presence that they end up calling anyway. In-hae asks about his date with Hae-won, and Woo, feeling proud, beams when she compliments him for keeping his composure. Soon after, the newly renovated guest house opens for business. Woo and his vampire friends create handwritten calligraphy flyers, which attract their first guest. To celebrate, Hae-won gifts Woo a painting, delivered with a car. In-hae briefly considers selling it to settle Woo's debt, but he just barely manages to talk her out of it. Meanwhile, having heard about Woo from Hae-won, Man Ho-choi arrives to stir up trouble. After provoking Woo, he speeds his car straight at him, triggering Woo's vampiric reflexes. Instead of dodging, Woo stops the car with his bare hand in broad daylight. Unluckily for him, Do-shik's secretary captures the entire scene on camera. The previous dinner incident had already unsettled Do-shik, as he noticed Woo's unnatural speed. When his secretary shows him the dashcam footage, Do-shik finally realizes the truth: Woo isn't human. Now that Do-shik has figured out Woo is a vampire, he tries to subtly probe In-hae by asking if she's noticed anything odd about her housemate. He's fishing for information, but In-hae deftly brushes off his suspicions, doing her best to defend Woo without giving anything away. Later, Woo comes home in a somber mood. shaken by the revelation that his lifespan may be much shorter than he thought. In-hae, ever perceptive, immediately notices his gloom, but when she asks, Woo shrugs it off, pretending everything's fine. Things only get worse for Woo when he accidentally overhears In-hae tell Hae-won that she has no intention of dating Do-shik anytime soon. With his matchmaking efforts completely derailed, Woo can barely focus on his date with Hae-won. She admires the beauty of the flower field, but all Woo can think about is how quickly the blooming daffodils will wither away. Unable to contain his growing frustration, Woo finally lashes out at In-hae. He blames her for everything, for opening the coffin, for ruining his plans, and for having poisonous blood. In a fit of anger, he storms out and heads to his vampire buddy's rooftop hideout, where he tries to drown his sorrows in instant ramen and junk food. The guest house welcomes its second lodger, a cheerful, chatty dad who quickly wins everyone over. He cooks a delicious French toast breakfast for In-hae and the other guest, treating them like his own daughters. Later, he opens up to In-hae, sharing that he's grown distant from his wife and daughter, who live overseas. During his rare visits, he wonders if his presence is more of a burden to them. In-hae comforts him by sharing her own story. She explains how she used to resent her absent father, feeling abandoned, but eventually realized she missed him more than anything, and now just hopes he's alive and well somewhere. Woo overhears this conversation while returning from taking out the trash, and her heartfelt words make him reflect on her life, feeling sympathy for her loss. That night, the neighborhood patrol brings Woo and In-hae back together. Woo seizes the moment to strike up a conversation, but In-hae, still annoyed, brushes him off. However, his sincere apology finally softens her, and she scolds him for staying out all night and neglecting his guest house responsibilities, though her concern is obvious beneath her words. As they walk back, In-hae confides that she's never been in love and doesn't think she ever will. She compares the odds of her falling in love to the chances of flowers blooming on the dead tree in their front yard. It's a casual remark, but Woo's gaze lingers thoughtfully on the tree, contemplating her words. The next evening, In-hae returns home to find the tree glowing with fairy lights, resembling flowers in full bloom. Moved by Woo's gesture, she asks if there's any way she can help him become human. Woo finally reveals that he needs her love-struck blood. Though In-hae is understandably confused, how is she supposed to infuse her blood with love? Seeking advice from his vampire friends, Woo decides to take their suggestion. Life is about give and take. He offers In-hae a deal if she helps him by giving her blood. He'll leave the mansion for good once he becomes human. But the idea of Woo leaving doesn't bring In-hae the satisfaction it once did. Man Hae-hwa, always causing trouble, sneaks into Woo's basement lair. There, he discovers Woo's painting of Hae's son and steals it to show Hae-won, only piquing her curiosity further. When Hae-won visits Woo, she asks to see his basement room. Woo agrees, and when she inquires about Hae's son, he confesses that she died long ago, but seeing Hae-won felt like bringing her back to life. Fascinated by Woo's mysterious past, Hae-won suggests that In-hae host a retro-themed party at the guest house. Not only would it draw in more guests, but it would also be the perfect chance for Hae-won to ask Woo out. This suggestion unsettles In-hae, though she can't quite pinpoint why. Woo, ever mindful of his stylish image, visits the tailor shop to prepare for the party. To his surprise, the shopkeeper recognizes his name. Apparently, Butler Ju had commissioned a custom suit years ago, with instructions to hold onto it until Woo came to claim it. When Woo tells In-hae about this, it sparks a flicker of hope in her. With the help of Woo's vampire friends, the party kicks off with great success, drawing a lively crowd. Amidst the celebration, Woo finds his gaze drifting away from Hae-won and towards In-hae. The feeling is mutual after a few drinks. In-hae follows Woo outside, and in a moment of honesty, admits that she likes the mansion because he's there. When they return to the party, the crowd excitedly chants for the hosts to take the dance floor. In-hae tries to steer Woo towards Hae-won, but instead he grabs In-hae's hand, unknowingly stealing Hae-won's moment in the spotlight. Woo leads In-hae into a graceful waltz, and as their eyes meet, it's obvious to Do-shik, Hae-won, and the entire audience that there's undeniable chemistry between them. As the story heats up, I'd love to know your thoughts. If you're enjoying this recap so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment with your favorite moments, and share it with fellow drama fans. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next updates. Now, back to the drama. Frustrated that In-hae has taken what she sees as her rightful place beside Woo, Hae-won smashes a row of champagne glasses and storms off. In-hae hurries after her, hoping to calm her down, but Hae-won is certain that In-hae has feelings for Woo. When both Woo and Do-shik come to In-hae's defense, jealousy flares up in Hae-won, and she vows to bring In-hae down a notch. After the party cleanup, In-hae urges Woo to apologize to Hae-won for hurting her feelings. However, Woo confesses that the only person he's truly concerned about is In-hae. He apologizes for putting her in such an awkward situation and promises to clear things up with Hae-won. The next day, Do-shik confronts Hae-won about her impulsive behavior, reminding her that love requires consideration for others. She retorts that his approach will only cause him to lose In-hae, pushing Do-shik to show In-hae the CCTV footage of Woo as a vampire. In-hae's immediate concern is whether Do-shik has shared the video, revealing that not only does she know Woo's secret, but she's also protecting him. This is the final straw for Do-shik, testing his patience. Ever since learning that In-hae is living with a man, His only concern has been her safety. He questions whether she's ever considered his perspective or tried to understand him the way she does Woo. Do-shik feels like he's always been on the outside, looking in. In-hae can only apologize, unable to justify her actions, yet unwilling to betray Woo. While In-hae is out, Woo discovers that his scroll of Hae's son is missing. He searches the house in vain, feeling disheartened. In-hae reassures him that it's just a painting, and that his lasting feelings are what truly matter. Just then, Hae-won drunk dials Woo, and he goes to pick her up. She's so intoxicated that she clings to him all the way home. The next morning, Hae-won confronts Woo with the scroll, asking if he's truly not human. She selfishly suggests they kick In-hae out of the mansion, using the scroll as leverage until Woo fulfills his promise to her. But Woo calmly replies, "No, you don't need to return it." Echoing In-hae's words, he explains that it's just a painting. He's waiting for someone who taught him what it means to be loved, not just a doppelganger of Hae's son. When Woo doesn't return by nightfall, a worried In-hae rushes out to find him, frantic with concern. Just as Woo feels warmth from her worry, his vision blurs, and he suddenly collapses. Fortunately, his vampire friends, Sang-hae and Dong-seob, hear In-hae's panicked cries and rush to his aid. It's unusual for a vampire to fall ill, let alone pass out in a human's bed. In-hae stays by Woo's side, eventually dozing off. When Woo wakes, In-hae admits how terrified she was that he wouldn't regain consciousness. She confesses that she can't handle losing someone again, not after her parents, and that losing Woo would devastate her. "I know your heart belongs to someone else," In-hae murmurs, but this is the first time she's ever felt this way, and she feels compelled to admit it. "I think I like you." Woo responds by pulling her into a kiss. As they part, looking into each other's eyes, Woo reassures her, promising he won't go anywhere. He'll stay right by her side. The next morning, our lovebirds are adorably bashful and In-hae even put on makeup. Unfortunately, a potential morning smooch is interrupted by Sang-hae and Dong-seob, who insist on moving into the guest house out of concern for Woo's health. As for Do-shik, his sudden chest pain sends him to the hospital, and his condition seems to be worsening rapidly. With time running out, Do-shik feels compelled to follow the instructions recorded in his family heirloom. The only way to heal his failing heart is to track down a half-vampire, recognizable by a distinctive scar, then take their heart out and drink their blood. A last-minute babysitting request unexpectedly turns into an amusement park outing, where we discover that while vampires may terrify humans, it's roller coasters and haunted houses that terrify Woo. Later that evening, after enjoying their babysitting reward of titikbaki, In-hae suggests they set a date. Now that she's fallen in love, Woo can finally drink her blood and become human. She even proposes they celebrate with a party on the 100th day of his awakening. Moved by her heartfelt offer, Woo agrees, smiling warmly at her gesture. Meanwhile, our troublemaker, Man Hwai, is stirring up chaos again. Hearing about Do-shik's investigation into Woo's supernatural background, he pays Do-shik a visit, offering to help track down the half-vampire he's looking for. Both stand to gain from the alliance, and Do-shik, though cautious of Man Hwai's true motives, reluctantly agrees. After all, he recognizes him from the CCTV footage. Man Hwai then reveals the full story of Woo's quest to become human. Elsewhere, Woo excitedly shared good news with Yang Nam. He secured his love-filled blood. Now he and In-hae can finally be happy together. But Yang Nam's reaction is grim. He clarifies that Woo is talking of the wrong person. Surely he means Hae-won. Once Woo reveals his heart belongs to In-hae, Yang Nam drops a bombshell, drinking a little of In-hae's blood won't cut it. Since she opened his coffin, the curse demands either In-hae kills the vampire herself. In other words, only one of them can live. Man Hwai hears this from eavesdropping Woo and Yang Nam. Do-shik hears about this from Man Hwai, and he immediately rushes over to the guest house, punching Woo square in the jaw. Is he really planning to kill In-hae? In what world does it make sense for a blood-sucking vampire to fall in love, and with a human at that? "You're a monster," Do-shik accuses. Inside the guest house, the first lodger's stalker shows up to harass her, and when In-hae tries to intervene, she is shoved aside in the ensuing scuffle. Woo's bite mark flares with pain. Sprinting inside at vampiric speed, Woo makes quick work of the stalker. However, In-hae sustained a head wound, and Woo bloodlust overrides his rational faculties. His eyes flashing red, Woo can't help but lean in, enticed by his beloved's blood just as he was centuries ago. That's the scene that greets Do-shik when he finally runs in, confirming the monstrous risk that Woo poses to In-hae. Yanking Woo aside, Do-shik cradles In-hae close, while Woo is struck with horror at his own actions. After the stalker attack, In-hae is hospitalized, calling out for Woo in her sleep. When she finally wakes, Woo is the first person she asks for, leaving Do-shik visibly frustrated. Why can't she see the truth? Desperate, Do-shik warns her about the danger Woo presents, accusing him of manipulating her just to drink her blood. But In-hae remains unconvinced. "I'm not asking you to return my feelings," Do-shik pleads. It doesn't have to be him, he just can't bear it to be Woo, knowing she'll be in danger. Though she's grateful for his concern, In-hae is firm in her decision. She spent her entire life holding back, so for once, she wants to follow her heart. Do-shik, overwhelmed with fear for In-hae's safety, blocks Woo from entering the hospital and bluntly tells him to stay away. Left alone, Woo resolves to protect In-hae even from himself. "I'll give my life for hers," he decides. If one of them has to die, Woo would rather it be him, a fate that seems closer now, as his healing abilities are failing and bruises linger on his skin. When In-hae returns home, the two reunite in a heartfelt embrace. Sensing Woo's guilt for nearly losing control, In-hae comforts him, assuring him that she doesn't see him as a monster. Her feelings haven't changed, he is still deserving of her love. Meanwhile, Hae-won, seemingly regretful, returns the scroll to Woo, confessing that its presence weighs on her. She asks how she can win back his heart, but Woo apologizes, acknowledging that he wrongly sought Hae's son in her. They're simply too different. Hae-won's remorse soon vanishes, replaced by cold spite. She shows up at the guest house unannounced, informing In-hae that she's pulling her investment. In-hae will need to repay her, and since she doesn't have the money, she might as well give up the mansion. Refusing to back down, In-hae firmly rejects Hae-won's demand, declaring she'll never surrender the mansion, as it means too much to Woo. She stops Hae-won's raised hand mid-slap, standing her ground. After spotting the bite mark on Woo's neck, Do-shik enlists Man Hwai to capture him alive. Woo is the half-vampire whose blood he needs, and Do-shik knows he must move quickly before Woo becomes a danger to In-hae. At the same time, Woo has been handing out flyers in hopes of finding In-hae's father, creating the perfect opportunity for Man Hwai to set a trap. With a fake lead, Man Hwai lures Woo to his hideout and locks him up, waiting for Do-shik to retrieve him. Luckily, Woo's sharp-eyed vampire friends catch wind of Man Hwai's scheme and rush in to free him. Unfortunately, they are no match for Man Hwai, who is far stronger due to years of feasting on human blood. After toying with them for a while, Man Hwai leaves, but Woo is left severely weakened, his wounds refusing to heal, unlike those of his companions. The day is finally won, and In-hae's father, Ju Dong-il, is freed at last. Overcome by his sudden return, In-hae directs her frustration at him, assuming he abandoned the family without explanation. She's carried the weight of their absence for so long, feeling the ache of loss all these years. How could he reappear so easily now? However, In-hae later overhears her father explaining his abduction to Woo, and the truth shatters her assumptions. When her dad offers a heartfelt apology for leaving her alone, the emotional dam breaks, and they share a tearful embrace of reconciliation. Meanwhile, Do-shik arrives at Man Hwai's hideout long after the chaos has died down, only to discover the grim remains of the underground dungeon. The foul stench of blood makes him question even more deeply his uneasy alliance with Man Hwai. When Man Hwai's greed spirals out of control, Do-shik decides he's had enough and calls off their deal. Sensing his grip on the situation slipping, Man Hwai proposes a trade. He'll share the secret to capturing a half-vampire if Do-shik reveals why he's after half-vampire blood in the first place. Meanwhile, ever the protector, Do-shik repays In-hae's debt to save her from losing the mansion, even though it pains him to know she's still living with Woo. He may not approve, but he refuses to stand by while she's driven from her home. Though the mansion is safe, Woo's condition worsens. He collapses mid-laundry, prompting In-hae to realize the urgency Woo needs her blood. When Woo awakens, he knows In-hae has already figured out the truth. Determined to protect her, he leaves for a farewell trip, unwilling to take even a drop of her blood. By the time In-hae wakes, he's gone, and though she knows it's a hopeless chase, she rushes out, desperate to save the man she loves. Do-shik uncovers the truth about Man Hwai's dungeon and confronts him over kidnapping In-hae's father. True to form, Man Hwai shifts the blame to Hae-won, refusing to take any responsibility. Disgusted that Man Hwai would stoop so low just to help Hae-won claim the mansion, Do-shik ends their partnership. Having already learned the critical piece of information he needed to kill the half-vampire, he must stab him with a knife made from hawthorn wood and silver, targeting the scar. Do-shik then faces off with Hae-won, who is outraged that Man Hwai would pin his actions on her, even though she's been spreading news of Woo's identity to the local residents to turn them against him. Do-shik tries to persuade her to halt her redevelopment plans, but Hae-won remains unmoved. To shield In-hae from Hae-won's schemes, Do-shik gently raises the idea of selling the mansion, but In-hae is adamant not even her father can sway her. She's now the one determined to stay, waiting for Woo's return. This puts her in danger when Man Hwai invades the mansion, looking for a fight with Woo and threatening In-hae. Far away, Woo's instincts kick in, and before Man Hwai realizes it, he's tackled by a furious Woo. Though initially outmatched, Woo finds new strength when Man Hwai strangles In-hae, unleashing a surge of power that allows him to defeat his foe. After Man Hwai flees, Woo turns to leave, but In-hae stops him, reminding him of his promise to stay by her side. Shamed, Woo pulls her into a heartfelt hug, just as Do-shik arrives to witness the scene. Later, back at the mansion, In-hae calls out Woo's decision to leave as selfish. She tells him that abandoning her would only cause her to suffer the same endless longing that he once experienced. Instead, she proposes that they face their challenges together and seek a different solution. As the blood moon inches closer, the clock counts down to Woo's demise. Late one night, Do-shik summons Woo to an abandoned warehouse. The tense setting suggests an ambush, but instead of attacking, Do-shik hands Woo the hawthorn silver dagger. His message is clear: if Woo can't protect In-hae, perhaps he could at least die to save her. However, Woo refuses the grim offer, determined to keep the promise he made to In-hae. Without a second glance, he turns his back on Do-shik, walking away a dangerous move when your rival is armed and has a score to settle. As Woo strides forward, Do-shik unsheathes the blade, quietly following, biding his time for the perfect moment to strike. By pure chance, In-hae stumbles upon the tense standoff, unknowingly preventing Do-shik from carrying out his plan. Her unexpected arrival halts Do-shik in his tracks, and the assassination is put on hold, at least for now. When the ever unwelcome Man Hwai crashes a tense meeting between Do-shik and Hae-won, their shady dealings are exposed. Enraged by their betrayal, Man HY uses his vampire strength to strangle Hye-won, but Du Shik quickly spins him around and plunges the Hawthorne silver dagger into his chest. The weapon does its job, and Man Hye disintegrates before their eyes. Shaken by her near-death experience, Hye-won decides to abandon the redevelopment project. She invites Woo for one final coffee, where she tells him she's heading to the US, feeling it's time to move on. Before leaving, Hye-won gives Woo a farewell gift, warning him that Du Shik is after him and urging him to stay safe. Aware that his time is running out, Woo decides to complete his bucket list with Hye. After a heartfelt farewell to his vampire friends, he embarks on a seaside trip with her. They share a beautiful day on the beach, reflecting on how much they've taught each other about love and gratitude. But their idyllic day is cut short when Woo suddenly weakens and nearly collapses. Later, in their hotel room, Hye offers Woo her blood. The taste triggers a flood of memories, confirming that Hye is indeed the reincarnation of Hye-sun. As night falls, Woo quietly slips out, leaving a sleeping Hye behind to meet Du Shik by the sea. A flashback shows that Woo had already asked Du Shik to kill him and take his blood before the blood moon rises. He'd rather his death serve a purpose if it means saving both Hye and Du Shik. He's ready to give everything. His only wish is for Hye to live a happy life filled with love. On the beach, Woo asks Du Shik to take care of Hye, and in a surprising moment of honesty, Du Shik admits Hye was right. All along, Woo is a good person. In tears, he finally recognizes Woo's humanity. As the eclipse begins and the shadows deepen, Woo urges Du Shik to act. Du Shik raises the dagger but is interrupted once again by Hye's alarmed shout. Though Du Shik hesitates, Woo knows there's no time to waste. Grabbing Du Shik's hand, he plunges the dagger into his own chest, but wait, that's not where the scare is. Could there be a twist? Hye rushes to his side in horror as Woo collapses, bleeding out in her arms in a tragic echo of Hye-sun's death. He assures her they will meet again one day, vowing to find her next time. As Hye cries in agony, the bite mark fades from Woo's neck, and he grows still. He's gone. The next morning, Woo's friends and the Jew butlers gather to say their goodbyes as he's laid to rest in his coffin. Hye, heartbroken, thanks Woo sincerely for coming into her life. Later, Yang Nam visits the mansion, bringing a gift from Woo. When the redevelopment threat surfaced, he had hidden away the gold to protect it but confessed to Woo, who asked him to keep it secret as an excuse to stay with Hye. With this, Woo's debt is finally settled, ending the gold bar mystery with a quiet resolution. Some time passes, and our vampire friends are thriving. Dong Esiob's Titik Bulky shop is now bustling with customers, and Du Shik is giving back by donating to children's heart surgery causes. Meanwhile, Hye's guest house business is booming, though she occasionally finds herself looking longingly at Woo's flower lights. Keeping the shaded oasis tradition alive, Hye organizes regular neighborhood gatherings. During one of these parties, she slips away to Woo's basement room, lost in memories of their time together. As she returns upstairs, she spots a familiar figure on the balcony. It's Woo, and she greets him with a bright, joyful smile.